The proof range sat at the far edge of the ridge, a timber wall twice a man's height, thrown up against the hillside and packed behind with rammed earth. Dogwang had designed it himself, and he had explained his philosophy to every apprentice who ever asked, and several who hadn't. If she's going to burst, she bursts now, talking to a timber wall, not in 3 months talking to a gun crew. That was the whole of it. No sentiment, no ceremony. Every barrel that came out of the foundry went to that wall before it went anywhere else, loaded past its service charge, fired by a long cord from behind a berm. The ones that held were guns. The ones that didn't were lessons. I had watched perhaps 40 proof firings by then, and had grown, if not comfortable with them, at least accustomed to the rhythm. The charge goes in, the crew walks back, the cord pulls taut, the world holds its breath for a fraction of a second that always feels longer than it is. This one did not hold. The barrel came apart in a single hard crack, not the rolling boom of a good discharge, but something shorter and more final, like a fist closing. Fragments struck the timber wall. Smoke rolled sideways across the range in the morning wind. Dogwang was already moving before the echo died, his voice cutting through the haze. Down! The crew dropped by reflex, though there was nothing left to drop from. When the smoke thinned, the trunnion mount sat empty and scorched, and the barrel lay in 3 pieces in the dirt. No one was hurt. That was the point of the berm, the long cord, the timber wall. That was the point of all of it. But I stood at the edge of the range looking at those 3 pieces and felt something cold settle in my chest that had nothing to do with the morning air. That barrel had passed every check we had. I called them together on the range itself, with the wreckage still where it had fallen. Baek Tae-ho, Yun Seo-rin, Dogwang, the 4 of us standing around the pieces like physicians around a body that had not yet been told it was dead. That barrel passed every check we have and still burst, I said. Our checks have a hole in them. We find it, today. Dogwang looked at the shattered breech section without expression. Seo-rin already had her ledger open. Tae-ho crouched beside the largest fragment and said nothing, which with him meant he was already thinking. I had learned, in the years since I'd woken on this ridge with nothing but my grandfather's habits and a head full of processes that didn't yet have materials to run through, that the worst thing you can do after a failure is guess at it. Guessing feels like action. It has the shape of competence. But a guess applied to a broken part is just another way of hiding the flaw, and a hidden flaw is the only kind that kills you. We don't guess at it, I said. We diagnose it. This barrel is going to tell us exactly how it died. Tae-ho did the fracture reading first. He had the eye for it. He'd grown up watching his father break test bars and read the grain, and in the 2 years since I'd taught him what I knew of metallurgy, he had surpassed me in the tactile part of it. He turned the breech fragment in his hands, tilting it toward the light, running his thumb along the fracture face. The break had started deep inside the wall, not at the bore surface, not at the outer face, but in the middle of the metal itself, where no inspection had ever reached. The fracture surface there was different, older looking, with a dull granular texture that stood apart from the bright crystalline shear of the final rupture. A pre-existing flaw, something that had been there since the pour, sealed inside the steel, invisible to every gauge and every eye. It started in the middle of the metal, Tae-ho said, from a flaw already in there. Seo-rin looked up from her ledger. Her voice was level, the way it always was when she was most unsettled. So the question is, how did a flaw get sealed inside our steel, and how did it get past me? It was the right question. It was the only question. And the fact that she was asking it about herself, rather than about the foundry, or the poor crew, or anyone else, was why I trusted her more than anyone else on the ridge with a measuring instrument in her hands. She traced the barrel's history from the beginning. That was the thing about Seo-rin's ledgers. They were not records of outcomes. They were records of process. Every heat, every pour, every cooling time, every dimensional check, signed by the hand that performed it, time-stamped against the forge log, the chain of truth she called it, and she had built it step by step over 18 months until it covered every piece of iron that left our foundry. Every step signed, she said, turning pages with the focused economy of someone who has memorized the structure of her own filing system. Somewhere in this chain, a flaw walked in and nobody saw it. The records will tell me where. She found it in an hour. I was not surprised that she found it, only that it took as long as an hour. The batch this barrel had come from, cast 12 days ago, during the worst of the war pressure weeks, when the Empire's advance scouts had been sighted 2 valleys east, and the warden had come to the foundry personally to ask whether we could double our output. That batch had a gap in the degassing record, not a falsification, not a deliberate omission. A step rushed past, a timing mark that showed the metal had been poured 20 minutes before the degassing hold was complete. 20 minutes. The difference between steel that had shed its dissolved gases cleanly and steel that had trapped them inside as it solidified, leaving voids sealed in the heart of the metal like pockets of absence waiting for the right pressure to become catastrophe. We sectioned the batch. Tae-ho cut cross-sections from 3 other barrels at the forge, and we looked at what was inside them. The metal looked perfect from the outside, smooth bore, clean exterior, dimensions within tolerance on every check, and in the heart of 2 of them, visible only in section, the voids sat like dark eyes looking back at us. The metal looks perfect, and it's rotten in the heart, Seo-rin said. I had been standing very still for the last several minutes. There is a particular quality of anger I have at myself, not hot, not loud, but very clear, and I was in the middle of it. Haste again, I said. Fast hit a flaw, and fast nearly killed people. We pull every barrel from that batch, now. The fix was not complicated. That was the thing about root cause work. The diagnosis is the hard part, and once you have the root cause, the correction is usually obvious. The flaw was internal casting voids from an incomplete degassing step. The degassing step had been rushed. Therefore, never rush the degassing step, enforce the hold time with a second signature, and add 2 new inspection steps to catch what had slipped past. The first new step was the tap test. Tae-ho demonstrated it on the sectioned barrel, moving a small hammer along the outside of the wall in a grid pattern, listening to what came back. Tonk, dead, he said over a void. The sound was flat, absorbed, wrong. He moved the hammer. Ting, sound. This time the ring was clean and bright, the note of metal that was solid all the way through. He looked up. I can hear the rotten ones now. The second step was batch sectioning, 1 barrel from every pore cut open and examined before the rest of the batch was proof-fired. Destructive, expensive in material, non-negotiable. The third step was the hold time lock. No pore signed off without 2 witnesses to the completed degassing, and the timing recorded to the quarter hour. 3 new steps, I said, and that whole class of death is gone. That's what a failure is for. I meant it. I had meant it every time I had said something like it, going back to the first cracked lathe bed in the first wooden machine shop, going back further to my grandfather's bench where a misread micrometer had cost a week's work, and he had sat me down and walked through every step until we found where the error had entered. A failure that you understand is not a defeat, it is a specification. It tells you exactly what your process cannot yet do, and it tells you in terms precise enough to act on. The barrel that burst on the proof range had done more for the safety of every gun crew on the ridge than 100 barrels that held without telling us why. That did not make it comfortable to stand in front of the crews and say so. I gathered them at the range in the afternoon, the pour crew, the inspection crew, the proof team, the barrel handlers. Word had traveled fast, the way bad news always does in a small town under pressure. I could see it in the way they were standing, the particular stillness of people who are waiting to find out whether they are in trouble. I did not make them wait. The rush degassing had happened on my watch. Under pressure I had not pushed back against hard enough. The inspection gap had happened because we had not yet built the tap test into our process, which was a gap in my process design. The barrel had burst because the system I had built was not yet complete. Those were the facts, and the facts were mine to carry. What I told them was this: the proof range had done exactly what it was built to do. The barrel had failed here, against a timber wall, with a long cord and a berm between the charge and any living person. It had not failed in 3 months on the wall, with a crew standing behind it. The system had caught the flaw. The system had worked. "We find the weak ones here," I said, "so they never find you out there." I watched them hear it. There is a difference between a crew that has been told something and a crew that has understood it, and you can see it happen if you are paying attention. The stillness changed quality. Not relief exactly. There was still work to do, still barrels to pull, still a batch to condemn, but something that was the beginning of trust in the process rather than fear of it. Seo-rin stayed after the others had gone back to work. She was closing her ledger, methodical as always, her brush moving down the final column of the day's entries. I watched her for a moment. "Your fussy little ledgers just saved more lives than any cannon ever will," I said. "The measure is the quietest weapon we've got, and the deadliest." She did not look up immediately. When she did, her expression was the one she wore when she was deciding whether something was worth the effort of a response. She decided it was not, which meant she agreed, which with Seo-rin was the highest form of acknowledgement. She closed the ledger and walked back toward the metrology room, and I stood alone on the proof range for a moment in the late afternoon light. The reproofed barrels went up to the wall 3 days later. Everyone from a clean batch, everyone tap-tested and signed, everyone fired at proof charge and held. Do-gwang walked the line of them in the early morning, running his hand along each breech in turn, the way a man checks a horse before a hard ride, not ceremonially, but with genuine attention, looking for anything that didn't feel right. He stopped at the end of the line and looked out over the ridge, toward the valley where the Empire's advance was still somewhere in the distance, moving toward us at whatever pace empires move. "Every gun's been tried twice as hard as the Empire ever will, and held," he said. "I'll not be sending anyone to die behind these." There was no theater in it. Do-gwang did not do theater. It was simply a man who understood proof testing, saying what proof testing meant, in the plainest terms available. I had nothing to add to it. I stayed on the wall after he left, watching the light change over the ridge. The veil was visible at the edges of the sky, that pale dome that had been failing for as long as I had been here, its slow guttering the whole reason we were building what we were building. It looked the same as it always had. I had learned not to trust that. The barrels were sound. The process was sounder than it had been yesterday. 3 new steps stood between a rushed pour and a dead gun crew, and Seo-rin's ledgers would hold the chain of evidence for every barrel that would ever come off this ridge. The metal I could test. I had learned to read fracture faces, to hear the difference between a dead note and a live one, to trace a flaw back through a chain of signed records to the exact moment it had entered the work. The metal would tell you what it was if you asked it in the right language. The town was harder. Iron Ridge had grown fast under war pressure, faster than any settlement I had bootstrapped the process for, faster than the social structures that held people together could comfortably absorb. New workers from 3 valleys, old families displaced by the foundry's expansion, apprentices promoted past their experience, foremen carrying authority they hadn't had time to grow into. I had been watching it the way you watch a casting that's cooling too fast, waiting for the stress to find a weak point. You couldn't tap a hammer against a town and hear where the voids were. You couldn't section a batch of people and look at the grain. The flaws in a community under pressure were sealed just as deep as the ones in that barrel, and they didn't announce themselves until the moment they became catastrophic. Tomorrow I would look at that.